previous episodes, we've talked about myths and legends that have been a part of our histories for years and years, and in some cases, millennia. Some of these tales have basis in reality, with evidence supporting the claims that they are true. But in this episode, we're going to be talking about a myth that started its existence only within the last 15 years. Let me take this opportunity to thank you for watching Mysteries, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. Now, back to the show. Slenderman is part of what I call Internet Mythology, creatures and stories created by the denizens of the web that, thanks to technology and access, have grown like wildfire among tweens, teens, and those of us who lurk about wanting to be scared. But Slenderman is unique in this world of stories because he's grown beyond it into a terrifying reality, and for 3 young girls on the last day of May in 2014, the reality of Slenderman would change their lives forever. On this episode of Mysteries, we're going to delve into the dark side of the internet to find the truth of the being known as Slenderman. Slenderman is an image that many today would recognize. Tall, thin, wearing a suit with long arms and fingers, with tendrils of shadow coming from behind him, the creature is eerie and haunting. There's something familiar about this image, something that makes you think you've seen him before. But the truth is, Slenderman hasn't been lurking about that long. In fact, he's just over a decade old, but there's a reason he feels so familiar. Slenderman was born out of the world of online forums from the early 2000s. Something Awful's website started in 1999 and went on to become the birthplace of a lot of the internet's culture and story life. And that's where the site's forum came into play when it decided to host a contest for photoshops featuring imagery of the paranormal. Eric Knudsen was one of the site's posters on the forum and decided to do something a little different for his entry. Instead of just making an image, Eric wound up inspiring an entire mythology by adding to the images quote-unquote witness statements to go along with the 2 rather eerie and disturbing images. We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them. But its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead. The 2 photos, which show Slenderman with groups of children, are haunting, and they worked, inspiring others to start adding to this incomplete narrative with their own ideas for what exactly Slenderman was. It was as though his blank face was a place for those who wanted to add to the story whatever they wanted to sketch could go. This left Slenderman open for other posters and writers to take the story and run with it, and boy, did they. The internet phenomenon known as creepypasta began around the same time as Slenderman, and Slenderman soon became a major player within it. Creepypasta is a form of short fiction that was written online and typically involved something very scary and horrific. These posts and stories quickly grew in popularity starting around 2008, with many tweens and teens becoming engrossed with the mythologies and characters that they were based around. Slenderman was joined by characters like Jeff the Killer and Eyeless Jack, both very horrifying in their own right, and all of them with stories and tales that were written by a community that couldn't get enough. Slenderman gave readers and posters something they could expand and add to their own accord. There was no real history for him, just the images that had been created and a few lines from victims. This vague unknown opened up the doorway for creativity and darkness. Slenderman himself was inspired by a few things already in the public consciousness. Again, why he looks so familiar. Eric Knudsen was inspired by a few things, like the Cthulhu Madness tales of H.P. Lovecraft, urban legends like the Mothman, and a few others. Slenderman also looks more than a little like the horrific gentleman of Buffy the Vampire Slayer's episode Hush, which aired years prior to his creation. Funnily enough, actor Doug Jones portrayed one of these terrifying figures in the episode and would later on play Slenderman himself in the film Always Watching a Marble Hornet Story, something we'll get into a bit more detail in a moment. There were things, though, that followed Slenderman. His appearance tended to remain the same in all the stories. He usually wound up being found in locations away from people, in abandoned places. Things wouldn't quite work right when he was haunting. Much like the characters within the Lovecraft stories, the victims would slowly start showing signs of madness, fear, and dread. Nightmares and visions would also be a part of the Slenderman's slow creeping effect on his targets. It's fascinating to me how the internet gave birth to these creatures, and how it fits into the role of myth, and how myths are created and shared. Since Slenderman wasn't actually in public domain, it's a complicated rulebook for the characters. Knudsen has actually blocked people from making films and works about him, but allowed others. Yet the internet stories and art expanded like wildfire. The stories grew, and people who weren't part of the forums of the internet culture of creepypasta lovers started hearing about Slenderman, and it became something else altogether. Stories started sprouting around that Slenderman was a real legend, that he'd been around for years. Much like how the stories of the Blair Witch would be believed thanks to some brilliant marketing online and the magic of found footage and realistic-looking photos, Slenderman leapt from the tiny realm of the computer monitor into real life. The world of film wasn't far behind. Slenderman would be a go-to for indie filmmakers and YouTubers who started creating rather well-done short films featuring the creature. Usually these involved kids or teenagers being targeted by Slenderman. One of the most famous of these would be Marble Hornets, which would be one of the first series to really full-bore have Slenderman as a key plot point to their story. Marble Hornets, as said earlier, would in 2015 have a feature film spin-off called Always Watching, a Marble Hornets story. Marble Hornets would add another layer to the Slenderman myth with avatars being made of the Slenderman's victims. This would entail these unfortunate souls being used as zombie-like instruments by him in order to hunt, kill, and perform the tasks he wants them to do. Always Watching would expand on the Operator, aka Slenderman, character and would get a limited theatrical release. In 2018, a horror film was released simply titled Slenderman and would feature a group of teens who have to deal with the ramifications of having summoned him. It was not well received. Possibly due to Slenderman having come from a virtual world, video games would have also be a place to find him. Slenderman and Slender the Eight Pages are two such offerings. Slender the Arrival is another. But as I said before, when a myth crosses over into reality, it can be horrifying, and when it happened with Slenderman, it went even beyond that. Creepypasta and the internet communities that saw the rise of the stories in the internet myth phenomena were frequented by a number of young kids and teens. This allowed a number of impressionable young people to discover the tales and the legends that were all wrapped up in a photoshopped pseudo-reality of fake, true stories. Within these groups, you'll find kids who have some forms of mental illness and or problems with discerning what is real and what isn't. This is typical of any large groups, but the internet is a special sort of beast where kids who find it difficult to interact with other people can do so in the safety of their own home through the shield of a monitor. Add to that the inability to discern fact from fiction, and these children can create a whole world known only to them, where a creature like Slenderman can be very terrifyingly real. In 2014, only a few years from when Slenderman first appeared, two 12-year-old girls from Wisconsin, Anissa Weir and Morgan Geyser, stabbed their friend Peyton Leutner a total of 19 times after taking her out to the woods. Leutner actually lived, making her way to a roadway, bleeding out. Geyser and Weir were apprehended later by authorities. While in custody and questioning, they told the police that they did the deed in order to sacrifice Leutner to Slenderman. While Geyser didn't show any sort of remorse in the crime, Weir did say she didn't want to do it, but felt she had to in order to protect her family from Slenderman. In fact, the two were walking to Slenderman's mansion to live there after the crime. Both girls were tried as adults, and both were found to have mental illness, with Geyser diagnosed with schizophrenia. Both were sentenced to evaluation by psychiatrists. Geyser was sentenced to 40 years to life, with Weir sentenced to 25 years to life. In 2021, Weir was actually released with a massive amount of regulations, including her internet use being monitored and absolutely no social media. The creepypasta community rallied around Leutner, and the site runners as well as Knudsen condemned the crime. A documentary was released in 2017 called Beware the Slenderman on HBO that follows the aspects of the crime, the lives of those involved, and the impact of Slenderman. The incident put a lot more eyes on Slenderman and the internet in general, especially the use and access by children, be it good and bad. Sadly, some people are not able to tell the difference between reality or fantasy, and no matter what precautions are taken, the worst can always happen. Thankfully, in this case, Peyton Leutner lived through her ordeal. Slenderman hasn't gone away. The films and video games I mentioned were mostly released after the attack, and the internet myths continue to grow, with whole subgenres dedicated to the creation of scary videos and stories. It's a uniquely online world of modern folklore, and I do mean world, as creators from around the globe continue to contribute to it. Folklore, mythology, and mysteries have been with us since the days we've lived in caves, and perhaps Slenderman and the creatures like him may be the next evolution of us writing on the stone walls, just with a little bit better tech. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention. Apparently another way to gain Slenderman's attention is to start researching about him and finding out about his story. Wait. Did you hear that? What was that? Oh, one second. Oh, you may not want to turn